Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Oh, wait, none of you can talk. Never mind. Raise your hand if you can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. We have a, all right. Oh, I gotta mute this. All right, so we're gonna get started shortly. I just want to let everybody know we're starting the recording.
All right, then as it is 10 o'clock, I think we can begin the meeting, our workshop today. Good morning. My name is Havel Weidner, Associate Architect with the California Building Standards Commission. With me in the room today is Laura Mills, Analyst 2 with the CBSC, who is managing the teleconferencing technology for this meeting. Welcome to the third Building Standards Commission workshop for non-residential standards pursuant to SB 745, the Drought-Resistant Buildings Act. Today is July 2nd, 2026, and this meeting is scheduled from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. with a break roughly around noon for lunch. Today's meeting is available via Zoom and teleconference as noted in the workshop notice and agenda. This meeting will also be live streamed to the CBSC YouTube channel, but please be aware that the live stream has an approximate 45-second delay, and there is no method of offering verbal or written public comments through the live stream. Closed captioning is available via Zoom's automated live transcriptions. To view closed captioning in Zoom, click on the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you're watching via YouTube. The meeting materials may be viewed on the CBSC's website as listed in the workshop notice and agenda. Now, Laura Mills will read the Zoom and teleconference instructions.
Good morning, everyone. To avoid feedback or other technical issues, please join the meeting through one device only. Comments will first be taken from the public in Zoom with their hands raised, then from the public on the Zoom phone line. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen for me or Havel to ask for any comments from the public. Then please virtually raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom. For those on the phone, use *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to unmute and mute. I will call on speakers in the order of hands raised and give you the ability to speak. When you are done speaking, please lower your hand and mute. If you forget to mute yourself, I will do it for you. If you like, you may announce your name and who you are representing before making your comment. Please remember to mute yourself when you're done commenting. And keep in mind the 4-minute time limit for each individual speaker. Please ensure that you have a working microphone on or attached to your device prior to raising your hand to make a comment. I will continue through the queue until there are no raised hands remaining. When comments are complete, we will then proceed to the next agenda item. Again, please remember the 4-minute time limit. And also, please speak slowly and clearly so your comments can be correctly transcribed. If you experience any technical difficulties, please call our office at 916-263-0916. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions regarding the Zoom and telephone instructions for today's workshop meeting?
There
If
are
there
no
are no
hands raised.
questions, okay. If there are no questions at this time, I'll proceed with the agenda items. And I'll share agenda. All right, so agenda item one. Can you see that agenda, by the way? Or is that showing up? Okay. Agenda item one, call to order, roll call, introduction and workshop overview. We've covered the call to order and introduction, and we actually don't need to go through a roll call for this workshop. So we're going to move on to item number two, which is reviewing updates to the workshop charter. Let me share our workshop charter. So this is the updated workshop charter document for this workshop, developing building standards pursuant to SB 745. There haven't been many changes to the workshop charter document, but I do want to make a note. You can see there that changes or additions to the charter since the previous workshop have been underlined. And I did want to bring attention to changes in our schedule, which you can see here at the bottom of page 3. And so you can see in the rulemaking schedule, we have not met for this workshop in over 6 months. And this pre-cycle workshop happening today on July 2nd is much closer now to the beginning of the next triennial adoption cycle, which is when these standards are intended to be formally proposed for adoption. And as a result, this is likely our second to last workshop meeting today. And the next meeting will be the final workshop for development of these standards. I added October. You can see that we have it listed there. The final pre-cycle workshop would be in October of 2026 as a potential month for the next workshop. But we're about to begin workshops for the next cycle of rulemaking for many other parts of the code as well. And so this workshop may have to happen sooner than October in order to fit into that schedule. But I'll issue more information about that after we have scheduled it. And as you can see, also on this schedule, following that pre-cycle workshop, we're much closer to engaging a CEQA consultant for our CEQA study for these regulations, which will hopefully begin soon and continue in parallel with the rulemaking process during the next triennial rulemaking cycle. The dates beyond the final workshop on the schedule and the CEQA line item for this schedule show approximate major milestones for the rulemaking process for the next cycle. So you can see there initial rulemaking submittals for the parts which are likely to be affected by these draft standards will be in February of next year. And you can see there that we'll go into 45-day public comment period sometime in May or slightly after May of next year. And hopefully we'll have the initial study of the CEQA analysis prepared in tandem with that public comment period so that both of those sets of documents can be examined in tandem. And then the intent is for these standards to be published in the 2028 edition of the California Building Standards Code, which will be published July 1st of 2028 and effective January 1st of 2029. I also wanted to point out the next item in this workshop charter, workshop participants. We're still sending out emails regarding this workshop. and we will continue to send updates regarding the rulemaking when we get there to our list of workshop participants. And if you would like to be added to this list and receive updates about this topic, please reach out to our office or to me directly, and I'll add you to our list of workshop participants. Does anyone have any questions about the schedule or the workshop participants or any other elements of this charter at this time? Please raise your hand in Zoom if you do.
No hands raised.
Okay. Seeing that we do not have any questions on Zoom, we don't have any phone calls either. Okay. Oh, okay. We've got a hand up.
It says IAPMO codes and standards.
Okay, we've got a comment from IAPMO Codes and Standards.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And I'm Enrique Gonzalez from IATMO. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. My question is general as we start this meeting. What are the procedures and expectations of submitting input and recommendations? Is it done on the floor as we speak through it? Or I did see an email to kind of contact the team here prior to the meetings if there's any input. So what is the process here as we're kind of closing up towards the end of the meetings? If you could guide us on that, if we were to see something that we want to recommend.
Yeah, we definitely any comments that you want to give us today, just as part of the workshop, are greatly appreciated, especially because that gives an opportunity for other workshop participants to add on to that comment or respond to that comment with their own ideas and contributions. But you're also welcome to send us written comments in the form of an email or email attachments in the form of PDFs or Word documents, with any commentary you have on the draft standards or the workshop process. And you can send those to the main inbox for the Building Standards Commission. You can send them to myself directly, just making it clear that the subject matter is pertaining to the SB 745 workshop series. And we do have, I was going to talk about it a little later on in this presentation, but we also have a file sharing platform set up for this workshop group through which we allow all of the workshop participants to review and share documents and comments that they have on the standards. So we've been uploading written comments that we've received to that file sharing platform. And I'll share more information about that later on in the workshop, but it's a box.com folder. And it's similar to what we had done for the Calgreen embodied carbon work group. So yeah, you're welcome to send us written comments. You're welcome to speak here today, and all of that input is appreciated and taken into account in the development of these standards.
Thank you. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And next is Megan.
Megan, I see your hand up.
Yes, hi, Havel. Thank you so much. This
Hey.
is Megan Murphy with the California Municipal Utilities Association. The charter mentions AB 130. I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit. From my understanding, the implementation of SB 745 is not subject to that, and you have an exemption.
That's correct. Yeah. So within this language of AB 130 and now within the language of the Health and Safety Code, we received an exemption from any of the limitations on building standards development that are a result of AB 130. So these standards are not subject to those limitations. And if you want, I can reach out to you directly and provide exactly where that appears in the Health and Safety Code now. It looks like it's written there that Health and Safety Code Section 18940.7. That's the SB 745 section that gives us the authority to proceed with this work. And it was given an explicit exception in the AB 130 language.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, but do you want me to follow up with you and send you, I can give you the direct portion of the AB 130 language that gives us that exception, if that would be helpful.
That's okay. I think it's written here clearly.
Okay, great.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, Kevin, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Laura and Havel. This is Kevin Day, Deputy Executive Director of the California Building Standards Commission. Thank you for facilitating this to you both. I just wanted to add a clarifying statement about the AB 130 exception for implementation of SB 745. We do get the exception as well as HCD, but there is another element of AB 130 that is restrictive, and that is the new requirement or restrictions during intervening code adoption cycles in Health and Safety Code 18942, which kind of supersedes that. So just want to clarify that while we can continue with the SB 745 development during the residential moratorium of AB 130, it must be done during triennial code adoption cycles, not during an intervening, which is consistent with the original statute, which requires BSC and HCD to research and propose these standards every 3 years during triennial cycles, starting with the forthcoming 2027 triennial cycle. So just wanted to add that kind of clarification. Thank you, Havel.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I see it stated here in this charter document that we may consider for adoption during this period in the triennial code adoption cycle, but that AB 130 disallows all but a few limited types of building standards from being adopted in the intervening code adoption cycles. So, yeah, so it'll be for the next several cycles, it'll be something that is developed only during the triennial cycle. Any further questions on the charter or comments?
We have Thomas Enslow.
I see Thomas Enslow.
Yeah, hi, Havel.
Hey.
Just a quick question. I mean, the question about the limitations of what you could adopt. I mean, they don't apply, but they also only apply to residential. CBSE, of course, is only proposing the non-residential standards. As HCD, I haven't heard yet that HCD has been moving forward in any residential standards. What's the status of that, and how is that going to relate to what we're doing here?
Unfortunately, I can't speak to HCD's development of standards pursuant to SB 745. There may be, I can't see our attendance list for today, but it's possible there's someone from HCD present that would want to speak to HCD's development of standards pursuant to SB 745. Is there anyone from HCD present today that would like to speak? We may not have any of the HCD folks. Oh,
Mitchell's here.
oh, we've got Mitchell Baker.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Mitchell.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Mitchell Baker with HCD. Yeah, HCD is currently working in the background on implementing SB 745. If you're signed up on our website, you'll receive any sort of notices that HCD releases regarding our efforts, our work. But we are here in attendance, and we're observing the Building Standards Commission's work on implementing SB 745. And we'll continue to do our work and coordinate with the respective stakeholders as needed during our development process. So stay tuned, sign up on our website at hcd.ca.gov for any announcements or information about HCD's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell. And Thomas, um, does that answer your question, or do you have any further questions about that in the application of AB 130?
That answers my question. Thanks.
Okay, great.
No other hands raised.
All right, I'm seeing or hearing from Laura that we have no other hands raised regarding the workshop charter and no phone calls. So with that, we can move on to our next agenda item 3, which is review of the draft non-residential standards. And we'll review updates to the draft non-residential standards that the Building Standards Commission has prepared pursuant to SB 745 for potential inclusion in the 2028 Green Building Standards Code. I'll share a few slides that provide an overview of the proposed changes, and then we can look at the specific draft amendment language. So we'll start with some more visual representations of these standards. Let me share those. All right, so SB 745, the current draft non-residential standards. Mandatory and voluntary standards. The draft standards include changes to both the existing mandatory and voluntary CalGreen requirements for water efficiency and conservation. And this is just an update on the previous version of these draft standards that we shared in our last workshop, workshop 2, on November 20th of 2025. And you can watch that presentation. It's recorded and available on our YouTube channel if you search for it. And all of the workshop documentation for that workshop is available both on our website and also in the boss.com document file sharing platform for this workshop group. And so this presentation is more about changes to those draft standards since the previous workshop, and may not be comprehensive of all of the draft standards. So I do recommend, we'll go through the draft standards language in its entirety in the next portion of the workshop. But the last presentation does explain a little more the intention behind some of the draft standards language. And so just really quick, here you can see throughout this quick presentation, the mandatory standards are kind of highlighted in blue, the voluntary are kind of highlighted in green. The mandatory are in Division 5.3 of Part 11 CalGreen, and the voluntary are in Division A 5.3 of CalGreen. Those are the Tier 1 and Tier 2 voluntary standards. And this is a slide from the previous workshop's presentation on these standards. And it was part of describing the effect of the draft standards, which is to take the voluntary electives that are currently in Division A 5.3 of the voluntary Tier 1 and Tier 2 standards and bring a number of those electives into options which are a part of the mandatory Division 5.3 standards. And you would have to select one of those options in order to comply with the mandatory standards. So in effect, it's taking the concept that has been in existence in the voluntary portion of the CalGreen standards for a while now and migrating that concept into the mandatory standards, which is something that has been a part of kind of the CalGreen standard development process, testing out standards in the voluntary tiers, and then with consideration, migrating them to the mandatory standards. And so this would just add one additional option to the requirements in Division 5.3. Here on this next slide, this also appears in the last presentation for the last workshop that we did. You can see that Section 5.305 of the mandatory standards would come to include numerous subsections that contain the options. And so these options are different systems for the purpose of potable water usage reduction, from which you would have to select one of these options in order to comply with the mandatory water reuse system standards. And changes to those draft standards since the last workshop. All of that language was in the previous draft that we had issued for that November workshop and was presented on at that time. Since then, we've received a few written public comments from members of our workshop group who are interested in contributing to the standards, which we really appreciate. And so in response to those comments, one item in particular that was noted is in section 5.305.1. That's kind of the scoping section of these options in the mandatory standards. There are a number of exceptions which, give projects for which these systems are not feasible or would not be beneficial to the local water system, an exception to these requirements. And so in the exceptions currently, we have as an exception, the possibility that these options may not be applicable to a project where implementing any one of these systems would cost 10% of the project cost. And we received feedback that 10%, our commenter suggested, and I'll discuss the public comments we've received at the end of these draft standards, that a different percentage would be preferable, 5%, a lower number. We haven't implemented that change, but we are seeking further input from this workshop group about what a suitable cost threshold to allow projects to be accepted from these requirements would be. Currently in the draft standards, it is 10%. So 10% of project cost if, installing non-water urinals, if installing a rainwater catchment system, if that is going to be 10% of your project cost or more, your project could receive an exception from these requirements. So that's something that we're looking for input in from this workshop group. Another change that we did make in this set of standards in section 5.305.2.1, we received a comment that the option to take any number of non-water urinals to the project site or include them in the project in place of normal flush urinals, that allowing any number to satisfy the requirements of this section may not have met the intent of SB 745 and potable water usage reduction. And so we increased the number to a minimum of 10. So your project would need to be providing 10 non-water urinals in order to use the non-water urinals option to comply with the option standard in this section. We also made significant changes to the voluntary standards. So the intent of the draft standards that we issued was not to in any way reduce the existing voluntary requirements. And we made modifications to the scoping of the voluntary standards for clarity.
Keep going.
Okay. Oops.
I want to move this.
Okay, is that visible on
is.
my
Well,
screen?
it's just a
Oh,
black-
I see.
yeah.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Laura's just letting me know that there's been a black box covering a portion of these slides for a little bit
you might
of
have
the presentation.
Yeah, maybe just minimize it for now.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
There you
Okay.
go.
That's a little less obtrusive. All right, sorry about that. I'm so sorry about that. There's the right-hand side of the screen. So scoping requirements were clarified, particularly the tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. The scoping language is in CalGreen currently. The organization has all of the scoping for the tier 1, tier 2 tiers in A5.601. So in a separate division than the water conservation standards. And so we added some scoping language to direct the code user to that section that contains the CalGreen Tier 1 and Tier 2 requirements. And we also made little modifications to the Tier 1 and Tier 2 language to clarify it, and added some prerequisite standards. And those prerequisites are intended to specify the type of water reuse system that is being selected for tier 1 and tier 2 compliance. So in those optional sections, if you're using tier 1 or tier 2, based on your project size, you would need to meet specific system requirements in order to comply. And that's described a little more on this next slide. So the tier 1 requirements as they stand in the draft standards now are to meet that prerequisite, which sets a specific type of water reuse system for a project based on the project size, and to take one additional option or elective. And the tier 2 is similar. It's the prerequisite and 3 additional options or electives. And as I said, those prerequisites specify the system that a project must use in order to comply with the mandatory requirement that's in section A5.305. And actually, I think that should just be 5.305. I'm sorry about the A that's in there. It's the mandatory requirement. It's the option requirement that we discussed earlier. So I'll show it on a later slide, but basically, when going through and selecting from these options that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the prerequisite would dictate which of those options your project may use for buildings of certain sizes or projects of certain sizes. And if the project cannot comply with the prerequisite for some reason, because a number of those options have their own limiting factors. Not all project sites will have recycled water available to them. Some project sites may not have reason to install gray water system. They may not have bathroom sinks or clothes washer connections. And so in that case, they would still need to comply with another option for water usage reduction. And all of this is included in that A5.601 scoping language. And so here you can see this slide better defines the prerequisite requirements, which appear in A5.601 now. You can see that for projects less than 10,000 square feet, that first box, for tier 1 and tier 2, any system is still allowed. So that's the baseline. That's what's required by the mandatory standards, regardless of tier 1 or tier 2, is that one of those options be provided. Then for projects that are greater than 10,000 square feet, but less than 40,000 square feet, if bathrooms or laundry hookups are provided as part of the project, a gray water system or landscape must be provided. And so that's, again, limiting the option which may be selected to comply with that mandatory option in section 5.305 to a gray water system for projects of this size. And again, if bathrooms or laundry hookups are not part of the project, then another system still has to be selected. For projects that are greater than 40,000 square feet, but less than 100,000 square feet, if recycled water is available to the project site, and that's described in the language of the standards, a recycled water system for landscape irrigation or indoor use has to be provided. So that's a recycled water system if it's available to the project site. But again, if that's not a viable option for the project, then another option must be selected. And for projects that are greater than 100,000 square feet, if recycled water is available, that's still the preferred system. Is recycled water system would have to be provided. But if it's not, there's a sub requirement, which is that an on-site treated water reuse system must be provided for projects that are greater than 100,000 square feet. And we'll look at the specific language of these requirements as we go through the draft standards after this. And so these are just some examples. This was also covered in the last presentation. You can see this is a draft example of compliance with the mandatory regulations. So in this case, the mandatory baseline, not including tier 1, not including tier 2, is to select one of these options and provide it to the project for compliance. And so in this case, you could select to provide 10 non-water urinals. You could provide, if recycled water is available to the project site, or may become available to the project site and you want to pre-plumb for it. You can provide irrigation system, outdoor recycled water supply system. Any one of those satisfies the mandatory requirements. And this is an example of compliance, including those tier 1 requirements. So if a local jurisdiction were to adopt tier 1 for a 40,000 square foot building, so this is in that third prerequisite category. It's not 0 to 10,000 square feet. It's not 10,000 to 40,000 square feet. This is a building that's 40,000 square feet or greater. And so it would need to comply with a specific prerequisite, which in this case would be an indoor recycled water supply system or an outdoor recycled water supply system, if recycled water is available to the project site or is expected to become available to the project site. And that's in addition, of course, to all the other mandatory requirements in Division 5.3. And then for Tier 1, in addition to the prerequisite, they would have to select one additional option or elective. And so it could be an elective. There are still several electives that would remain in Division 8.5.3. They would not be relocated into Division 5.3 mandatory standards. And so you could select either an additional option from the list of blue options that you see over there on the right, or an elective that you see over there on the left. And that would be in addition to the prerequisite requirement that you see there in blue. And so this is an example of Tier 2 compliance for a building of the same size, 40,000 square feet. We still have to comply with the prerequisite. So that prerequisite requirement is set by the building size when you're in Tier 1 or Tier 2. And then in this case, it's 3 additional options or electives. And you can see that in this particular example, there's 1 additional option that's been selected and 2 additional electives. So it's meant to be, the project design team's discretion as to which systems are most appropriate for the project, with, of course, the exception of that prerequisite requirement based on project size. And that's the end of kind of this brief overview. This is kind of just a visual guide. And so now we'll dive into the language of the standards themselves. This is the most recent draft of these standards issued for this workshop in particular. And you can see added to the legend of draft standards changes that have been made to this draft since the last workshop appear in these standards in blue. So everything that shows up otherwise was in the previous draft of standards. The underlined language is, new additions to the code. Everything else is sort of existing, and the underlines, the strikeouts, that formatting also applies to the blue text, just to help differentiate what we're adding to the code. So if you see something that's underlined and in black, it's new code language that we had in the previous version of these standards. If you see something that's underlined in blue, it's new language that you're seeing for the first time as part of this workshop that's new to these standards. But there's also some code language which is blue and is not underlined, and that's existing code text that we're adding just for clarity of understanding of these draft standards. It's not that we're adding that to the codes, it exists already in the codes, but it's blue because it was not previously needed for clarity in the draft standards and is being added for the first time in this draft. So just wanted to clear that up a little bit. And so you can see here, we're adding to Chapter 2, the definitions in Part 11. This was all in the previous draft. These definitions help with clarity of the different kinds of water sources that may be available to a project site and have to do with project sites which may receive an exception that we'll see a little farther down. So project sites where the potable water supply to the site is being provided by a direct potable reuse project or an indirect potable reuse project. They're part of a community where potable water usage reduction is already happening at the municipal scale, and the intention is not to kind of double up on that water savings and potentially burden the water system with water usage reduction. So there is an exception for that, and that's why those definitions are included here. And we'll go further into that. These are some additional definitions that appear at the start of Division 5.3. All this red text is not a part of what would be published or proposed in the codes. That's just explanatory language. So you can see the following changes to Section 5.305 are, as I described, intended to bring voluntary electives from Division A 5.3, the voluntary tiers, into the mandatory Calgary standards as options for compliance. And only one option has to be selected, which is similar to the current Tier 1 requirements. And so we can go into that. You can see this section A 5.305.1. This is kind of the scoping for this new option requirement. And all this language was in the previous draft of these standards. And so newly constructed non-residential buildings shall comply with one option in either section 5.305.2, which is the indoor water usage reduction systems, or section 5.305.3, which is the outdoor water usage reduction systems, the options that you have to choose from. And here's where we begin our robust set of exceptions. And so these are exceptions which are intended to allow project sites where these systems, again, don't make sense because of an existing municipal scale water recycling process, or because of infeasibility based on site conditions or the type of project, to give them an exception to this requirement. So that first one is where the potable water supply serving the project is delivered by a public water system which utilizes water or water sources from an indirect potable reuse project or a direct potable reuse project. This section does not apply. So again, it's that exception for project sites located where there's already municipal scale water reuse happening, and it's being provided as part of the potable water supply. And then the next one, item 2, where all systems and installations described in sections 5.305.2 and 5.305.3 are determined to be not feasible for the project, as demonstrated by the project design team and approved by the authority having jurisdiction, no system or installation is required. And we added this language: the project team must demonstrate that each option is not feasible. And so that's just to clarify that, it really has to be an exhaustive demonstration of the fact that each option does not work for the project site. And there are a few examples that we provide in this exception as to how a project team might demonstrate that a system, an option, is not feasible. And so the exception continues, a system or installation may be demonstrated to be not feasible for reasons including but not limited to the following. And this is where you see the costs exceeding 10% exception. And so that's if cost of total project is 10% for this system alone. And you demonstrate that for all of the systems that are in these options, your project would receive an exception to this section. And then lack of rainwater, gray water, or recycled water resources at the project site, physical constraints of the project site, other considerations approved by the authority having jurisdiction. So that, again, gives kind of broad purview to local building departments to adjust the need to give projects exceptions to their local conditions, because those will vary greatly throughout the state. And then 3, for projects where any system described in sections 5.3 or 5.2 and 5.3 or 5.3 is required to be provided by locally adopted building standards, no additional system or installation is required by this section. And so this third exception is meant for local jurisdictions that already have water reduction standards in place. So local jurisdictions who already implement requirements for gray water systems, on-site treated non-potable water reuse systems. If a local jurisdiction already requires one of these systems, the intent of these standards is not to double up on that requirement. And so they would receive an exception within the language of the standards themselves for having a local ordinance amending the codes to require one of these types of systems. And you can see here we've added a little descriptive request text regarding that 10% cost exception. The description of not feasible in exception 2 is revised to clarify the list of example feasibility issues. We discussed that, but the CVSC is seeking additional input regarding the 10% total project cost feasibility criteria. So any input, we did receive a written comment requesting that be changed to 5% and are looking for additional feedback regarding that percentage. Moving on to the actual language of the water use options. Again, that first one in the indoor water use options, non-water urinals, 5.3 or 5.2.1, that has been changed from allowing any number of non-water urinals to satisfy the requirement to requiring that there be 10 or more non-water urinals provided to satisfy that requirement. And that would be where 10 or more urinals were going to be provided throughout the project. So we're also seeking feedback on that item. And the descriptor text there explains the rationale behind that change. Again, we received a comment that, this particular option may need to be more restrictive to substantially conserve potable water. Moving on, you can see there 5.3 or 5.2.2. There are some slight changes to clarify the language. So where disinfected tertiary recycled water is available from a municipal source to the project site and is not already reserved for delivery to other projects, both a potable water supply system and recycled water supply system shall be provided for indoor uses. And so that was just to make sure that the recycled water supply is not encumbered for use by other projects when it's being selected as the option for compliance with this section. And there's some more clarifying languages, just slight changes there with alternatively, where disinfected tertiary recycled water will become available to the project site in the future, the project shall be pre-plumbed indoors with dual piping for potable and non-potable recycled water. And again, you can read, we have descriptions of why these changes were made. And you can see what the changes were in the standards. So I won't necessarily read through all of them, but if you do have a chance to review these draft standards and provide feedback, it's greatly appreciated. There are minor changes, and they're all described in the blue bracketed text at the bottom of each of these sections. And these are, again, kind of minor word choice changes just to clarify and kind of tighten up the requirements of these standards. But these are all of the optional requirements that we're looking at in 5.305.2 for the indoor water use options. And then a few pages down, or just on the next page, 5.305.3, the outdoor water use options. And so I'll move on to the Division A 5.3 non-residential voluntary measures, because that is where we made that big change to the prerequisite requirements in the voluntary tiers. And so you can see here that some language was added to the scoping section in A 5.3. And this is just to direct the code user to section A 5.601 for the additional scoping requirements, because Division A 5.6 is currently where all of those scoping requirements for Tier 1 and Tier 2 live. And it also clarifies, that you have to meet the prerequisite requirement in addition to the other requirements of Tier 1 and Tier 2. So the provisions of this division shall establish additional voluntary standards serving water used indoors, outdoors, and in wastewater conveyance. To achieve CalGreen Tier 1 or Tier 2, a project must meet the mandatory measures in Division 5.3 and the prerequisite and elective measures in Division A 5.3. And then it directs you to the required prerequisite and elective measures specified in section A 5.601. And there's a lot of descriptive text here that was in the previous version of the draft. That's why it's in red, kind of explaining the thinking in the proposal of migrating the voluntary tiers to be options that are within the mandatory section, and also discussing the elimination from these voluntary tier standards of the water use percentage reduction targets, the 12, 20, and 25%, just because we've received feedback that that's kind of a cumbersome set of standards to the design process. It's a bit difficult to understand, and by eliminating them, we're more closely aligning the non-residential portions of CalGreen with the residential standards, because those have been moved from the residential standards, the voluntary tiers, for a while now. And there's already, great flow rate reduction as the baseline now in our building standards. So reduction targets may not be the most effective way to continue reducing potable water usage in the voluntary tiers. We added the term electives to the section A 5.303 title in this draft. And that's just to clarify that there is a distinction between the options, which are options to be selected from in the mandatory division, and the electives, which are electives to be selected from in the voluntary tiers. just a bit of clarifying language. This is the elimination of the water reduction targets language, and that was in the previous draft. And again, adding electives to another section title. But here on the lower portion of this page is where we start to get into the water reuse prerequisites. And so here we're retaining this section number and a bit of the title in order to include these prerequisite requirements. And so you can see this language in A5.305.1, Tier 1 and Tier 2 water reuse prerequisites. So to meet CalGreen Tier 1 and Tier 2 requirements, projects with the area limits specified shall comply with the prerequisite restrictions of this section when selecting an option to meet the requirements of section 5.305.1. And so that's just directing you that based on the size of the project, you have to comply with the prerequisite restrictions of this section when complying with that mandatory options section. So that section 5.305.1 is the scoping language for the mandatory options. And so this is just letting you know that the prerequisites apply to that section if Tier 1 or Tier 2 requirements apply to your project. And so here you can see it's broken out as we showed in the kind of visual slide deck. It's broken out by square footage. So projects less than 10,000 square feet, again, shall comply with any of the applicable sections in the options. Projects 10,000 square feet to less than 40,000 square feet, again, have to comply with the requirements of section 5.305.3 or 4, which is the simple or complex gray water systems, as the selected option to meet the requirements of that mandatory options section. And we include a note that, you know, if the project does not contain bathrooms or closed washing machine hookups, it shall select another option. That project shall provide another one of those mandatory potable water usage reduction options. And then similar projects 40,000 square feet to less than 100,000 square feet, you know, they have to apply the section for either indoor recycled water supply systems or outdoor recycled water supply systems if recycled water is available to the project site or will become available to the project site in the future. And there's language within those indoor recycled water supply system and outdoor recycled water supply system sections that if the water is expected to become available to the project site, you're pre-plumbing for future use of that water. And then again, the last one is projects 100,000 square feet or more. And the requirement's very similar to the requirement above, but if the project cannot utilize recycled water, then they're required to provide an on-site treated non-potable water system. And that would be for, you know, indoor applications for toilet flushing, drain, you know, drain priming, that sort of thing. So that is the prerequisite requirements. And you can see that this language is included in section 5.305, A5.305, I should say. But it's directed to by the scoping language in section A5.601. So it's with the other Tier 1 and Tier 2 scoping requirements in Division A5.6. And so you can see here we've made some changes to the table that appears in A5.601, just to clarify that the prerequisites must be complied with. And then also adding the options that appeared in blue and are in the mandatory sections to the systems that can be selected from to meet tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. So previously it was just all elective sections, but now it's options and electives that a project can select from to meet those tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. And a little bit of additional scoping language in A5.601.2 for tier 1 and A5.601.3 for tier 2. And that's the end of that current draft document. So with that, I might just leave up our voluntary scoping language. I'll take it down and take any comments or questions that anyone might have about the current draft of the standards. And we can turn back to any specific sections if you want to see and review language more in detail that's been included on those pages. So any questions or comments?
Go ahead, IAPMO. I'm sorry I didn't make note of your name.
Can you hear me?
And yep.
Hi, again, my name is Enrique Gonzalez. Thank you, Chair, from IAPMO. And my comment is going to be specific to the new proposed section of 5.305.2.3. The
Do you want me to pull it up here?
if you can, because it'll be a great
Yeah.
speaking point and for clarification of the intent there.
Here. You said A or 5.305.2.3.
Correct. On-site
Okay.
treated, non-potable
Let me share that.
water for indoor applications.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can you see that?
Not yet.
Okay, give it maybe just
there it is.
A moment. Okay.
And so as I was observing this section, the second paragraph, on-site treated non-potable water systems shall allow indoor water use of on-site treated non-potable water per section 1506.1 of the California Plumbing Code and shall be installed in accordance with section 1506 of the California Plumbing Code. And so that reference to section 1506 is where I wanted to comment. There's so the proposed text in this section for CalGreen references 1506 of the CPC, Title 24, Part 5. And there is an IAPMO IGC 324 standard that's titled Alternate Water Source Systems for Multifamily, Residential, and Commercial Use, which is referenced in 1506. And we would like to propose the addition of the ANSI version of that standard to be included in Chapter 6 of the Energy Code. And Chapter 6 of the Energy Code is the referenced organizations and standards. And the reason for this is to leave the text alone. However, the AMO-Z 1324 is the ANSI accredited consensus version of IAMO IGC 324, which as mentioned is currently in 1506 of the CPC. And as a brief overview of what the standard covers, as the IGC 324 and the ANSI standard, it covers it establishes the requirements for the design, performance, testing, monitoring, and marking of alternate water sources that utilize gray water, rainwater, stormwater, air conditioning condensate, and other non-potable water sources. And it's for applications such as toilets and urinal flushing, irrigation, cooling tower, makeup water. And so the request here is to add this ANSI accredited standard version to the Chapter 6 reference. So they could be add clarity and consistency between the energy code and the plumbing code, and recognizing the latest ANSI version of the standard of that replaces IGC 324. So that's my or our recommendation to the group here. And so hopefully that's clear. What
Yeah,
that
just
request is.
to make sure I understand it, Enrique, this is already a standard referenced in section 1506 of the plumbing code. Is that correct? Is that right?
That is correct. So it's currently referenced as the IATMO IGC 324 standard.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a new consensus version that came out later and is now developed, and it would make a good update in Chapter 6 alone as a recognized standard. Even though the language talks about IGC 324 in the text,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it'll be good to reference the later version ANSI Z1324, which further builds upon it and gives the more consensus-based output of that standard. And so
Okay.
it'll allow for jurisdictions to recognize, well, here's that standard. It's there also as a reference standard without interrupting what the code says.
And is the intention when you say to put it in part 6, the energy code, that is separate sort of from this standards development?
Okay.
We can look at having it added to part 6. But do you think that the reference in this set of regulations in part 11 is sufficient, referencing section 1506 of the plumbing code?
It'll be silent with that reference because it's not recognizing the later ANSI consensus version of it. So this will be a good way to tie it in.
You're saying
to
add
make-
the ANSI Z1324 reference here in this
Correct.
section. Okay. Yeah, I mean,
no.
we could.
Just to clarify, Mr. Havel, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
I think the most streamlined way would be to do it in Chapter 6. It just recognizes the reference standard.
Oh, and the reference standards in chapter 6. I gotcha.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Without affecting, and then because Chapter 6, and I don't know if you have access to Chapter 6 right now, but Chapter 6 has the standards, then it has the reference sections that those standards talk about. And so the reference section would be the newly approved or the recommended 5.305.2.3 as it relates to this concept, this intent.
Right. Okay.
That would
No, I
be
appreciate
kind of
that
the
comment.
correlation of how to harmonize that. And that
Are
was
there
my
any?
recommendation.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Are there any responses or follow-up comments to that suggestion from the workshop group? I know we have an order of hands going already. Is that right? Okay. Well, feel free to bring it up when we get to your hand. But thank you for that comment, Enrique, and we will examine inclusion of that ANSI standard into Chapter 6 as
Thank you,
part
Mr.
of
Chair.
the next draft of these standards. Yeah. Thank you for
Okay.
that.
Next is Thomas Enslow.
Tom, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Excellent. Yeah, Tom Enslow, I'm counsel for the California State Pipe Trades Council. A couple comments. First, on the general exemptions, we still have this exemption for areas that have indirect or direct potable water projects. And there's just no justification for that. That's not provided for in the statute. And there's no documentation that any of these proposals would in any way interfere with those types of projects. We're trying to reduce the potable water use in new buildings. So that, we need all hands on deck here, just because, it doesn't matter where the water is coming from. We need to make sure that new construction is limiting its additional burden on our water supplies. And, to have this broad exemption, without any, evidence that compliance with these requirements would somehow interfere with those projects, just isn't, it's just arbitrary. And I think it's inconsistent with the intent of the agreement. I think, and especially in this mandatory, which it's very, very low standard to meet. And in the tier 1, tier 2, you don't need that type of exemption because it's voluntary for the local jurisdictions to adopt those, and they can determine then if there's any sort of inconsistency with their own water supply stuff. So we strongly object to that. The other exemptions make some sense. We will submit some comments as to the cost. We're gathering some materials on that I think will be very helpful, both for that decision and then for your final adoption as well. And then the recycled water for outdoor use as an option, we object to that. We think that recycled water, if recycled water is available, for outdoor use, that should be mandatory. That should be a mandatory standard if it's available. If it may become available, it makes no sense to pre-plumb, because this isn't the type of system where, we're worried about the cost of retrofitting of buildings. You can't, put in a new dual plumbing system, but to use, change from your potable water source to a recycled water for irrigation, that's not a pre-plumbing thing. So it just doesn't really make sense to have that as one of the options for compliance to pre-plumb. But if there is recycled water for outdoor use available, that should just be, plain mandatory, probably based on the size of, irrigated landscape area or something like that. But otherwise, we don't think that should be an option in the tier 1, tier 2 provisions. And then just one other thing, kind of a false equivalency of some of these optional standards. I think we need to have a recognition that if someone's going to choose a standard that requires dual plumbing, that's a lot bigger investment. For example, for in tier 1 or tier 2, we think that if they're required to use recycled water indoors, so they're doing that dual plumbing, they shouldn't have to do anything more. If they decide to choose a on-site non-potable water reuse system, that should be sufficient. But if they're not choosing one of those, then choose 3 other options. But I think we need to provide some sort of incentive to do the bigger project and recognize that that's a bigger lift and is saving more water than these other these other items. And we'll provide you some kind of proposed language on that as well. And then the appliance standard option that you add is one of the choices for the tier 3, tier 2, and also the metering. We're not convinced those make sense. That those are equivalent to these other requirements, and that they'll actually reduce the potable water use significantly in the buildings. And the appliance standard options are really only relevant to certain types of occupancies, depending on the appliances. There may be a place for them in this, but we're taking a closer look at that and are going to have some further comments on it. And those are the main ones for right now. We'll provide you some written comments as soon as possible and follow up on those.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate those comments. Just so I'm understanding correctly, it's specifically the pre-plumbing for outdoor recycled water supply systems that is a pre-plumbing issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because you don't really need to pre-plumb for that. And so
Okay.
having that as an option is just kind of a false option in our
Got it.
thing. If they actually have access to it, then they should have to use it. And if they don't, it's not costly to, then use it once they do have access. And that can be also just a municipal decision of whether to require
Yeah.
people at that point.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I would really appreciate those comments in writing, just because they're numerous and complex, it sounds like. So that would be
Yeah.
greatly appreciated. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next is Stephen Bilson.
Steve Bilson.
I'm here. Okay, Steve Bilson.
Hey.
Rewater systems. Since 1990, we've been involved in legislation and code writing, and here we go again for the millionth time. And I've got a whole bunch of things to talk about, all about untreated gray water irrigation systems as they relate to these codes and all the sections. And just basically, I don't see any reason why it can't be an option, untreated gray water irrigation for any size building. There's like a arbitrary cutoff at the 40,000 square foot project level. It's like, why? It might be just as appropriate for, 100,000 square foot project as a 5,000 square foot project. It's an option. If they have gray water, and irrigation, it's always a cost-effective option. And so there's no reason just, say we're going to make some kind of arbitrary cutoff on size of project. In reply to what IAPMA was talking about with the ANSI reference, we've had serious problems with IAPMA's ANSI IAPMA 350 standard for gray water. The state board had to come down with SB 966, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in man hours restricting those systems. We do not want references to outside third-party testing agencies in state code. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Other things, we've got, well, in exceptions 5.305.1, it talks about why you can get accepted. One of the things is kind of implied in this, but it's not really addressed, is the intent to install something because supposedly reclaimed water will come to the project. You got two wild cards there that if either one of them come up, the project never uses recycled water. So when you talk about if they're going to get recycled water, then they should pre-plumb. There should be a contractual issue with the water supplier. If they're going to get recycled water and it's available and it'll be on site and delivered, then they'll spend the money to pre-plumb. It's a cost-effective issue. Anything less than a contractual guarantee is a bet. And it's usually a bad bet because bringing purple pipe infrastructure in is horribly expensive. And you might have 1 million new homes and buildings and hotels, whatever, built within what would seem like just a very short distance from the treatment plant. And it's never cost effective to get the water there. So there should be something in here for contractual commitments. And then builders aren't just gambling that they're going to spend, $1 million pre-plumbing their building and not get the water. That's crazy. And you're asking a lot of builders to take that leap. So if you just put in there a contractual obligation before you give anybody, mandates or options, then it makes a lot more sense to the building community. And I'll put all this in writing. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I have been putting, we've received a number of written comments from Steve, and they're in our box.com file sharing platform. And I appreciate your comments, Steve. Steve, I will say that regarding the option to pre-plumb, our current language is at the top of this page, and it's an option that the project team can choose to proceed with. They're not required to pre-plumb. If they're in a jurisdiction that adopts tier 1 or tier 2, and their project is over 40,000 square feet, and the recycled water will become available to the project site in the future, then it would become a requirement. But I mean, if you have a suggestion for maybe how we could more specifically tailor this language, I don't know that we can include in state standards language regarding contractual obligations on the part of the project team. But the intent of this language is that pre-plumbing is only installed if recycled water will come to the project site and be used in that pre-plumbing. And so if you have recommendations for a specific way to change this language to make it more likely that that will be the final outcome, that would be really appreciated. Or if any members of this workshop group do. I do not believe that we can include contractual requirements, though, as a part of the state building standards.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe contractual that's definitely the right word, but there might be a synonym for it that can fly. Just a real quick example in the city of LA, when they decided to mandate pre-plumbing of gray water for all new multifamily construction. Builders have spent tens of millions of dollars preparing their buildings, but they didn't have to reuse the water because there's no mandate there. There's no contract there. There's no obligation there. And it's a mistake. All it does is raise the cost of housing. So there needs to be a direct link. I don't know what that word is, but there needs to be a direct link between the water and the builders. So it's not just a paper thing that nothing gets done. I don't know which word to use, but there needs to be some kind of nexus there that builders will participate willingly. It's not a fight if they know, okay, this is really going to actually work.
I appreciate that comment, and that was the intent of making these options, was that the project team can select the option that is most applicable, most appropriate for their project. And so the baseline, not including the tier 1 or tier 2 prerequisite requirements, is that it is an option if it is appropriate for your project. And this, again, this is strictly for non-residential occupancies, these standards. So the intent is not to impact the cost of housing. And again, to provide project teams optionality so that they can select an option that is appropriate for their project. But I appreciate the comment, Steve, and we'll examine if there's a more specific way to tailor this language. If you can think of any recommendations, please include them in your written comment. It'd be greatly appreciated.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, no other hands raised.
Oh, hand went up.
Okay, a hand went up. Okay, Megan Murphy.
Hello, this is Megan Murphy, Senior Regulatory Advocate with the California Municipal Utilities Association. I just want to express thank you for holding the workshop and kind of walking through some of these changes. We're in support of the exceptions and optionality and the way that you've laid it out. I think our concerns previously about installing dual plumbing, which may be abandoned infrastructure if there isn't the water supply to fill it, have been captured here, and also the use of the exceptions is improved. I'm more on the water supply side, so I just have some questions related to the building code. Can you explain what the tier 1 and tier 2 mean, and when would those be in tier 1 or tier 2? And you mentioned that the local jurisdiction would have to adopt that, so it's just not clear to me. And then the second question is there a full draft, or is this the draft that you're working off? I know the last version had additional text, so is there one full document of just the in its entirety, or because I know you're focusing on the changes in September, so if you could speak to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, Megan. First, regarding the tier 1 and the tier 2 requirements. So tier 1 and tier 2 of CalGreen, they're actually how CalGreen was first introduced. CalGreen was not mandatory throughout the state initially. It was intended that if a local jurisdiction wanted to, if they thought it was appropriate for their community, they could adopt these voluntary standards that had been developed. And so that was CalGreen tier 1 and tier 2. And tier 1 was less restrictive, less impactful set of standards. And tier 2 was a more impactful, almost a reach code. So it was the stretch goal in terms of sustainability standards. And over time, many of those standards have migrated to being mandatory throughout the state, regardless of whether or not a local jurisdiction adopts them or chooses to adopt them and thinks they're appropriate for their community. But there are still a number of standards, and there are new standards constantly included in tier 1 and tier 2 as stretch sustainability goals within the building standards for local jurisdictions to adopt if they choose to. And so that would require adoption through a local ordinance. And so if local jurisdiction chooses to, they can choose to adopt all of tier 1, they can choose to adopt all of tier 2, but the standards are also set up so that they can pick and choose parts of tier 1 and tier 2 if they want to. The intent is to provide a menu of sustainability standards that aren't required throughout the state, but are available to local jurisdictions throughout the state if they choose to adopt those standards. And so in the case of these particular standards and the prerequisite requirements, that would apply only if a local jurisdiction were to adopt tier 1 or tier 2, or if they were to specifically choose to adopt this tier 1 and tier 2 water use prerequisites section. It would not be a mandatory requirement throughout the state. It would be at the discretion of local jurisdictions to decide if that's appropriate for their community. But the intent is that it's a menu item, and they can say, we want to, based on the square footage of projects within our community, we want to have certain standards be applicable. And so it's just something that a local jurisdiction, without having to go through their own standards development process, they have very easy access to statewide sustainability stretch goal, if that makes sense. So that's tier 1 and tier 2. And hopefully I answered that, but you can, if you have additional questions, please ask them. And then Your second question, remind me, your second question was with regards to,
Oh, the document in its entirety.
oh, this is the most current version of this document, and it is intended to be a complete document. So you should be able to hold this up next to the current building standards and see exactly where we intend to make modifications to the existing building standards. There's no missing portions of this document as it pertains to these standards, in that all of the proposed changes pursuant to SB 745 that we have currently developed are included in this one document. And they are, slightly different colors, but this legend at the top hopefully is clear enough that it's legible. The blue is really just for this working group and just to help see, where we've made small changes to the drafts as we move along. But that underline strikeout, that is really the language that shows the changes to the standards.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
Hopefully
I
that
just didn't
helps.
want to, I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And I thought of another question. I'm sorry.
No, please.
So for the feedback and written comments, obviously you want to get that in prior to the October workshop, but do you have a deadline for that? Or are you accepting them on a rolling basis?
We're accepting them on a rolling basis. So anytime that you want to submit a written comment on these standards, we really appreciate it. Obviously, the sooner that we get those written comments, the more able we are to incorporate that feedback into the next draft of standards and into our other research, including like fiscal impacts. That's information that we're working on for these standards. And so we do really appreciate if you can get them to us sooner rather than later, especially because, as I mentioned, it's possible that October workshop will get moved up in the schedule, will get moved closer to now because we're going to begin having lots of workshops for the different parts of Title 24 for the next triennial cycle. But yeah, anytime that you would like to send us a comment, we really appreciate it. And we did, on these, we received some comments yesterday. But anything is greatly appreciated. And it just gives us more to talk about in these workshops.
Okay, thank you so much, Havel.
Yep, absolutely.
I am seeing no other hands raised.
Okay, well, with no other hands raised, and no other phone callers. Let's see. We can move on. I did want to bring up that we did receive several written comments on these draft standards. One of them was from Steve Bilson of Rewater Systems, who spoke today. And so I think he covered the content of that comment. It was regarding opposition to the application of the NSF 350 standard in the plumbing code. And Steve, I know that previously you had also provided written comments regarding the protection requirements of connections between potable water systems and or the potable water supply and gray water systems. So we do have a number of written comments in our box.com. And I see, Steve, your hand is up if you want to add an additional comment to that effect.
You'll need to unmute, sir.
And you might be muted. Yeah. Steve? All right. Well, we also received another written comment from an industry coalition of the California Building Industry Association, the California Apartment Association, the California Business Properties Association, and the Building Owners and Managers Association. And the comment letter generally supported the draft standards standards, but suggested clarifying section 5.305.1, exception 2, which is the exception which applies to projects where a system would cost 10% or more of the project cost. And that coalition suggested changing the cost threshold to 5%. So that's the feedback that we've received so far. And then also adding clarifying code language based on the definition of a significant cost impact. And they reference AB 2446, the statutes of 2022, as a reference for a definition of significant cost impact to help clarify that exception as well. And then wanted to have additional clarifying language from the requirements of the plumbing code included in the non-water urinals option. So we're looking at those suggestions. Steve, just one more time, if you unmute, if you want to talk further about your written comments, I see that your hand is still up. All right, well.
Here I go.
Okay,
Finally,
sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
I had a delayed unmute button. So yeah, on the going to the letter you mentioned just a second ago about the use of RPs and air gaps in untreated or treated gray water irrigation systems, which is really I'm not sure this is the exact format that this particular workshop, but it's relevant to talk about because it goes to the cost effectiveness of these systems and the options that people can choose from. And it's a big deal on these types of systems, whether you can use a reduced pressure device to prevent backflow or an air gap. And I just wanted to see if there's any place to put that into this conversation. It's going up to HCD or going over to HCD, the same thing. There's a lot of cross-pollination in these conversations about water recycling and energy and water use and values and things. And I want to kind of get it on the record here with your agency that we need to have a discussion about the RP and how it's preferred with the cross-connection people, state health, and it's not in the code as preferred. And so I want to just see if that's something that could be referred here or not, or that needs to be a discussion with Building Standards Commission or whoever else, HCD, whoever else is going to be talking about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment, Steve. I think it is an appropriate forum to at least raise the topic, and I appreciate that you did. It currently, my understanding of the issue that you originally wrote about is that in Chapter 15 of the California Plumbing Code, the Alternative Water Sources for Non-Potable Applications chapter, we have some state-specific language that's co-adopted by Building Standards Commission and HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, in section 1503.1I, which allows for the reduced pressure backflow preventer system as protection between makeup water connection for a potable water supply to a gray water system. And so that's co-adopted language that's state specific. But my understanding is that in section 1503.3, exception 1, the only connection allowed for by the model code is an air gap connection, not an RP protection for the makeup water to a gray water system. And so it would require coordination between HCD and the Building Standards Commission to resolve, and probably discussion with the State Water Resources Control Board and their cross-connection control policy handbook. But I think we'll look into that issue further, and so I appreciate you bringing it up. I don't know if Enrique with IATMO, Enrique, if you have any feedback on that, on the the requirement for connections between a potable water makeup supply and a gray water system in the plumbing code.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, take it from my ammo. No, I'll have to specifically look at it. I don't want to misspeak on anything at this moment, but
Yeah.
I can definitely, if a question is sent to me, I could definitely work on investigating the intent of what the code is covering. And I could do that. I could
Okay.
provide the feedback that way. But yeah.
I'll send you a message with the specific question because
Yeah, it's a good
we've
question.
received a
Yep.
number of comments about it. Yeah, and there is a little incongruity between the state amendment language and the model code language, it seems like. So it'd be good to iron out where that came from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anything else, Steve, on that comment?
Well, I think you hit it right
Your
on.
hand.
You hit it right on the head. Yeah, that's exactly the issue. You,
Okay.
You quoted the code correctly and everything. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep you in the loop on what kind of feedback we get on those changes. Any other additional comments before we move on to related items not on the agenda? Seeing no hands. I just wanted to bring up the that box.com file sharing platform that I mentioned before. We sent notice to all the members of our interested parties list for this workshop. That's everyone that appears in the workshop participants list on our workshop charter, that we have that box.com file sharing platform. And it's intended to contain all the workshop documents and any written comments or resource documents that members of this workshop want to contribute for other members of the workshop to see. And so if you want access to the file sharing folder on box.com, or if you need us to provide the link so someone else can access it, just send us a request and we'll share that link again. The intent is that it really be open to anyone that's interested in this workshop to review. Does anybody have any questions about the box.com file sharing platform for this workshop? Okay. Are there any other items not related to items on the agenda that anyone wants to discuss? All right, seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next item, which is the action items. I'm going to reach out to you, Enrique, about Steve's question and also about the ANSI standard for incorporation into Chapter 6, potentially. Tom, I'll look out for written comments from you regarding your comments today. I took a few notes on them, but written comments would be really appreciated for specificity. Megan, if you have any written comments, please send those to us as well. We'll work to incorporate today's feedback into the draft regulations for the next workshop, which will likely be our final workshop. And please feel free to reach out to me or to the main Building Standards Commission inbox directly if you have any further comments on this matter. Does anyone have any final comments on this topic for today? Okay. Seeing none, I'll move to item 6, which is adjournment. So if there are no further comments, I'll move to adjourn the meeting. And I want to thank you all for participating today. I look forward to continuing to work with you on this subject matter. So thank you so much and have a good rest of your Thursday.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. Bye.